I'm Judy Plattner Brodsky. I was born March 5th, 1941 in St. Joe Hospital in Omaha, Nebraska. And I was the first child of Laura and Larry Plattner, who were from St. Louis and moved from St. Louis in 1938 to Lincoln, Nebraska. And they came there. My dad was with Wool Shoe Company, and he was a salesman, and so they moved to Lincoln because that was part of the territory. And of course my mother hated it. It was dry at the time and not very social, and they thought they were very social. And so they moved and found out there were a lot of Jewish people living in Omaha. So they moved to the Loyal Hotel in Omaha, Nebraska, where there, I guess, were a lot of other young married Jewish people. And was Sarah and Bill Lorman and some people from St. Louis who were there at the time in the retail business. Omaha was very big in retail with Brandeis department store. And so my dad was there and worked for Carmen's and sold shoes at Carmen's. He was in the shoe business after he started. And then I think Bill Lorman and Henry Greenberg came to him a few years later and said, "You want to come to Phillips department store?" I guess Phillips had already been there for quite a while. So my dad and Bill Lorman both went to work at Phillips department store. And Bill went to work in the appliance part, and my dad ran the shoe departments. And at the time, Phillips was very much like a family. There was Henry and Ellie, and it was so distracting. Henry and Ellie, and Sam and Millie Greenberg, and they were half brothers. And so they ran the store, and they had the same father, or I think different mothers, or vice versa, whatever, and all their children. And that's where all the children and I became friends, with Justin and Barbara and Coleman and Midge, and we were all friends. And on Friday nights, which was the only night that a store was open late, we would all get together after the store closed at someone's house for dinner, which was usually Ellie's. And we would all go to Ellie's or Sarah's or my mother's, and they would cook this sumptuous meal. They were all wonderful cooks. And it was just fun for the kids, and we'd all be down there and play in the store. It was very, very family. In fact, it was one of the first stores ever that was big like that, that was the forerunner of like a Target, where you could go and buy your groceries and buy your shoes and buy your clothes and your prescriptions and whatever you wanted, all could be at the one store. And in talking to people later, I think what happened to Phillips and stores like that were the emergence of the big shopping centers. Because Phillips catered to, at the time, people from South Omaha, from SAC, a lot of people, all the people at SAC Air Force Base, and the stockyards. They had quite a variety of different people that loved to shop there. And it was a meeting place and a focal point. In fact, Ellie Greenberg, I don't know if anyone knew this, cooked all the food for the little lunch area that they had. She made the corned beefs, and she made the briskets, and she made all the food that they served there, totally. And so everybody in South Omaha, in wherever, people from West Omaha would go to Phillips, and they'd buy shoes from my dad, and they'd buy all kinds of stuff. It was wonderful. But with the advent of the shopping centers, people relied less and less on a store like that. And then I think when they also closed the stockyards, that was a big blow to Phillips. But then they expanded out, and I think Phillips went to Council Bluffs, and they went to Fremont, and they went to some other places. And I'm not sure if the Fremont store is still there or not, or the Council Bluffs store, but I do know that they were there after the South Omaha store closed. Anyway, growing up in Omaha was absolutely wonderful. Temple Israel was way down on about 30th and St. Mary's or something like that, and that was a wonderful place. But your grandmother and grandfather, Laura and Larry, going back to when they first came to Omaha, they moved from the Loyal Hotel with all their friends, and they moved out to an area that was by Mutual of Omaha. At the time on like 39th and right off Dodge, about 30th, I guess. And there were a whole area there around the old Admiral Theater that was very beautiful and really nice, and people walked everywhere, and you'd walk to the Admiral, and they had wonderful little restaurants around there. And remember, pediatrician was Dr. Robertson. And we lived in a place right there across from the Krasnys, Peggy Krasny, who I just saw passed away. And however, it was during World War II, and we were told that we had to move because we were Jewish. And so we moved to Hillside Court, which was over by this grade school was, shoot, I can't remember the name of the grade school, but Yates School, and we lived right, Hillside Court was right adjacent to Yates Grade School. And so we lived there, and as I remember, Merle Workhoven, who was a moderator or something like that at WOW-TV for a while, he lived there with his child. And then, and my brother was real little, your Uncle Mark. We were also there told we couldn't play with any kids because we were Jewish. And so we kind of had to be together because no one was allowed to play with Jewish kids. So that, until we were there until about, I was in the 3rd grade. And never really bothered me that we couldn't. I mean, that's just what you were told. You never knew why. So we moved there out to Dundee on 52nd and Cumming. And I went to Dundee School, and there were a lot more Jewish people. So it seemed like the whole school was Jewish. And everybody, it was a wonderful place to grow up in Dundee. I think everybody, again, you walked everywhere, you walked to school, there was Chris's drugstore, there was Baum's drugstore, there were grocery stores. Hinky Dinky was very prominent at the time. Downtown, by the time we got to 6th grade, we were all taking the buses by ourselves downtown to go to a movie at the Orpheum for a quarter. Or we would eat at a wonderful place was, I think it was 30 cents for a beef salad sandwich at Northrop Jones. And they had, it was just so wonderful. Downtown Omaha was filled with stores and shops and things, a lot of them owned by Jewish retailers. There were tons of Jewish retailers all over. Goldstein Chapman's and Herzberg's and Brandeis and Nadelson's were all Jewish-owned, beautiful stores. There was also Aquila Court, which was a gorgeous old, beautiful retail department store. There was Orchard and Wilhelm. Omaha was very, very thriving downtown, culturally and business-wise. And we'd all go downtown on Saturdays. We'd take the bus and go to a movie. And interestingly, Highland Country Club had a downtown club in the Hill Hotel. So we'd go downtown for lunch at the club, and you'd go upstairs. It was this fabulous deco. It's too bad it's gone now, but this gorgeous deco hotel with mirrors all over, and it looked like a 1940s movie. And then you'd go in, and there was this wonderful downtown club where they did have parties, and our mothers all played cards in the afternoon. And so we'd have lunch, go to the movie, come back, and all go home with our mothers. two were now done with playing whatever it was they played. And it was such a secure, Omaha was so secure and so wonderful to grow up in. You never thought of bad things happening. You were never aware of that. And I'm trying to think, it was about 4th grade. I was in the 4th grade when Highland built up the swimming pool. And Mike Platt and I were like the first kids to take swimming in the swimming pool. Until that time, the only swimming that we did was either Peony Park, which was fabulous, which was this huge, gorgeous area. Little did we know blacks couldn't go in. There was a lot of discrimination in Omaha nobody knew about. But, or as children we didn't, I should say. And so there was the Jewish Community Center, which was down on 20th and across from Central High School. And there was a man, Paul Verrett, who ran for years the Jewish Community Center. Everybody knew him. He was so wonderful. That also was a great place. The smell of the chlorine permeated the whole. You knew you were in the Jewish Community Center when you walked in the door and smelled that chlorine wafting up. It was terrific. And everybody after high school, also as we got older, you'd go across the street to the Jewish Community Center, and it was a meeting and focal point for kids after school. But anyway, back to grade school. So growing up in Dundee was really, really nice, and you rode your bikes everywhere, and we had wonderful friends. And later on, we would take buses out to Exarban to go ice skating. I mean, our parents never took us anywhere. We were never taken by our parents like kids are today. We were allowed to go wherever we wanted by ourselves, which was, I don't know, a good thing, a bad thing. But we transferred buses 3 times to go to Exarban to go ice skating, and we were in the 5th and 6th grade. So, I mean, either they didn't know or we didn't know what could have probably happened. And then we got to 6th and 7th grade, and at Dundee that was terrific. And I remember the bowling. There was bowling leagues down at the Music Box, which was a B'nai B'rith thing, and it was next to the Jewish Community Center. And speaking of that bowling, your grandfather, there was a wonderful B'nai B'rith men's bowling league every Sunday morning, and all the men bowled, and your father, Larry, was a great bowler and very beloved by his friends. And sometimes they'd take us if we weren't going to Sunday school, but they'd drop us off at the old temple, and then they'd go bowling, then they'd pick us up, and we'd go stop at there was a delicatessen on like 20th maybe, or 20-something, 24th, between Dodge and Harney, or Dodge and something, and we'd all, we'd pick up dinner. Okay, that's what you picked up. You either had that, or you had Chinese food, or you went to Cliff's. Okay, that was Sunday night. And, but all the men did wonderful things together. They went out to the racetrack, they played cards. The women also had their own groups. Omaha was very, very social, but in a very nice way. There were a lot of picnics out at the club before Highland became what it is now. There was a man named Henry Pollock, and he used to organize these wonderful picnics and barbecues, and they'd have maybe 30, 40 people, and kids and families, and all came out to there. A lot of things were done, like at Temple, and I'm sure at Bethel, and I'm sure at Beth Israel, with families and sisterhoods. At the time, were very involved in the life, the communal life, and as was Temple. Temple, they were the old German Jews who thought, it was the new way, the new reform movement. They all wanted to be modern, and so we belonged to Temple because your grandmother and grandfather believed they were very modern and very with it. And your grandmother she played golf as soon as she could. They all played golf and they all played bridge, and they were actually the first generation born here in the United States. And so all of their parents were refugees in a way, okay, and were old world and old country and spoke Yiddish. And they liked it and enjoyed it, but they wanted to be different and wanted to be new. And so they were the ones who did all these modern things. And they went to places like the Colony Club, and they did a lot of drinking, and they did a lot of dancing, and they enjoyed themselves tremendously. As a result of the Colony Club and their pepper steaks every Saturday night, all the men died by the age of, I don't think very many of them lived to be 70. And the women, there were, in the end of time, the women were all widows. There were a lot of widows in Omaha by the time they were in their late 60s. But they were all still friends.
Tell me more about your father, the kind of person he was.
Oh, okay. I don't know if I can say it without crying. He was fabulous. Larry Plattner was beloved, I think, by everybody. He really liked everyone. He never, ever, ever talked bad about anybody except one person I ever heard him speak bad about was one person. He was always upbeat. He was always had a good time. I don't think the only time that he ever reprimanded me or that I wasn't perfect was when I was 3 years old on what time. And there was an eeny, meeny, miny, mo, catch a by the toe. And I repeated that. I'd heard it somewhere, and he just went into oh my God, he went crazy. Don't you ever use that word. Negro was the word at the time, or as good as everybody else, and you are never, ever, ever, ever to use that again. I will never hear you talk like that. And my mother and he were both very, very liberal people who instilled in my brother and myself a great respect for everyone. And so in fact, my mother used to laugh that some probably had communist cards when at the time in the 20s that was the cool modern thing in St. Louis to do among their friends was to kind of be a communist. But my dad was so giving of his time and himself. People would come through that store, and I would see it when we'd sit there on Friday. Hi, Larry, how are you? Hi, Larry. No matter who they were, from someone who did street maintenance to the president of a bank, he treated the same. And he always treated people with total respect. He always asked what you were doing. He always was so interested in your life and in everybody. He was a great golfer. He loved to play golf. In fact, when he was sick, after they had this accident, he said, "Never come see me. I will never be at in a cemetery." He said, "I'm going to be in Palm Springs," which is interesting. We ended up here. He said, "It's the best place in the whole world, and I'm going to be there." So anyway, they were in this automobile accident, and the cards and letters that they got from people in Omaha was incredible. It was outside St. Louis. And he was there from August until Thanksgiving. And but never complained. His whole body, we didn't even know who he was after the accident because he was so shattered. He fought back, never complained, never said it hurt, never nothing. And he lived through it. However, he didn't stop smoking, and he had a terrible heart condition. But he kept smoking, and he kept having heart attacks all over the place. like on Maui and in here and there, and so we'd have to go visit. Said, please don't have any heart attacks unless they're in. So I'm only going to have them in nice places for you to come visit. His parents were terrific, and he was the oldest of 3 children. His brother Gene would come to Omaha and visit, and his sister Alice, who's still she's my only relative still alive, and that's Aunt Alice. And but my grandma Plattner, my dad's mother, she was kind of feisty. All the Plattner women were very feisty, or the wives. There were 9 brothers, and a lot of them didn't speak for maybe 20, 25, 30 years, but they were all in St. Louis. Everybody was in St. Louis, and they were all in the shoe business in some way or another. Everybody was in the shoe business. And and some were in East St. Louis. Some of them were in East St. Louis. And so when my parents got married, my grandmother, Plattner, said that my mother, who was 3 months older, robbed the cradle, that she was running off with a younger man, and she never forgave her. Never forgave her. They came, my father's family came over from a place called Sokolova, which was sometimes Russian, sometimes Poland. And there was a Sokolova Society in St. Louis that anyone who came from Sokolova could get $100 to like start a business or start a life in St. Louis. So my father said, you have no idea how many people would come, thousands would be from Sokolova to get the $100 from the group that had picnics and whatever. And my grandfather was exactly like my father. So where was I? With my grandfather, was the same docile, real mild-mannered, loved everybody loved him, easygoing kind of person, with a wife who was kind of feisty, as was my mother. And so I think sometimes maybe the very docile men go to the women who tell them what to do so that they don't have to make decisions. I think I'm kind of seeing that as I get older. I think they look for that. So anyway, on my mother's side of the family, my grandfather was, this very interesting story, his mother was a widow early, and it was him and then a little girl. And this was in Russia, where I guess these things happened. So later on in my life, my aunt told me this story, my mother's sister, was that a man came to her. She was very beautiful. And a man came to her as she was a widow. A lot of times widows didn't get married again. People didn't want them and didn't want their children. And they were just allowed to just kind of hang out and go, whatever would happen to them. So he came and he said, I really want to marry you. He said, but I do not want your older son, because he's 13 years old and he knew the other man and he won't love me. But the little girl, I want her because she'll know me as her father. So my great-grandmother said, okay. So she married the man. My grandfather at the time he was 13, put on a boat, sent to America, okay, like a lot of other 13-year-olds, and that's where he came, and she got married to this man and went. So, I mean, you think we can't even let our kids get on a bus somewhere, and he put him at 13 years old on a boat to go to the United States. But I think so did a lot of other, you see pictures of things of these young people that, I don't know, they survived. So anyway, that was their story, and he was a marvelous tailor, and he had a place in St. Louis that manufactured beautiful, beautiful high-end women's coats and suits. And so he was in that end of the retail business. So all my family at all parts of time were in the retail business at some point or another. Your grandmother Laura, Larry's wife, when after I went away to school, she worked at Zoop's, which was on 50th and Dodge, for a very long time. It was a lovely women's store in Omaha. and they later moved to another location. But she worked there, and it was in Dundee also, Old Dundee. And
Tell me more about your mother.
oh, she was a pistol. She was, she always told the truth, okay? And I remember one time I came up to her, and they said, oh, Laura, what do you think? I cut my hair. She said, that's terrible. She said, yeah, that looks awful. I liked your hair better. I was like mortified. I was like in my 20s, and I said, Mother, why did you say something? She said, they asked me. And if someone doesn't want to know, then they wouldn't ask. And I want to tell them the truth. I said, but they've already cut their hair. I said, couldn't you say maybe be kinder? You know, she said, well, she said, that's not what they want to hear. And so you'd go to her at the store to shop, and she'd come in, and she was the best. Because she'd say to someone, take that off. That looks terrible on you. You don't buy that. I'm not letting you walk out of the store in that. And so all these people did go to her because she said, that looks great, that looks terrible. Take that off, whatever. And so she was always like telling my friends, oh, that lipstick color is awful, get that off, your hair looks terrible, comb it. And of course, all my mother's friends were the same way with all of us. I mean, there was Mickey Bernstein, and there was Ruthie Kavich, and there was all these ladies, Esther Cantor. They all fought among themselves, you know, little things, but they all loved each other, truly. And they all treated us as they all owned us. So everyone could tell you, oh, you're too fat, you're too thin, you're too whatever. And it was, you like had a whole lot of mothers. And the fathers were all the same as my dad. I would say Dave Bernstein and Tony Cohn and all this group of men that they grew up with, or grew up with from their early 20s on, were all cared about all of us. And it was a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I think when you could say that, as it ended up too, Dave Bernstein's parents and my dad's parents met in the hot springs or whatever it is down in Georgia. They all had gone there for something, or Florida or somewhere. They met each other. So you could say that they knew each other, our parents knew each other. Phyllis and I and Dick and Shelley are very best friends. And our children were very wonderful friends and all met each other. And what's happened, then the grandchildren kind of didn't. I don't know what happened. You know, I think some kids are friends. A younger generation is. But the ones that, my granddaughter who's 17, that whole group never did get that closeness that our kids did. I don't know if it's because everybody went to different schools. Everybody, maybe they weren't all the same age. We were all the same age together and grew up really at Dundee, and then you move on to Central, and then we moved on and people came back. But there was a closeness that isn't the same anymore. And when we would go away to college, you'd go away somewhere, and do you know so-and-so, did you know so-and-so? And people, we find that today here at Tamarisk. We'll find people that we went to Illinois with, and they knew this one who went to Michigan, and oh, I knew that person. You don't find that with our children today. They don't, I don't know if they don't bother to ask. I don't know if they don't care and they're starting a new life. No one ever says, oh, did you know so-and-so, did you know so-and-so? And it's kind of a lost, that's too bad, I think. It's kind of a lost, not art, but a lost community among a Jewish network that I think dies with us. Because now we're meeting all these people here that we went to college with. Shelley just met somebody 2 days ago that was his pledge brother in Illinois. Hadn't talked to him in 50 years. Okay, here he turns up, and now we're going to see him again. And it's interesting how I still think of people that I went to grade school with and high school with and consider them friends. Now maybe I haven't seen them for 50 years, but if they would walk in here and I had been their friend, that's what I would have thought of them. My parents taught me that. My mother was always coming out here, oh, I met so-and-so and they connected with so-and-so and I asked so-and-so. And I find that that's what they were like. Shelley, on the other hand, his parents weren't like that. They were from Chicago and they didn't have that. And so he doesn't, now he's learned from us to do that. But maybe it's an Omaha thing. And maybe it's a Midwest Omaha thing, which is, I'm talking about Des Moines and Sioux City and Kansas City and Lincoln, where we were like a community, because when we were young, in the 6th grade, Jewish Community Center had a camp, Esther K. Newman. Oh, it wasn't that then, it was just a Jewish Community Center camp. And kids from Des Moines and kids from Sioux City, we made fabulous friends with these kids from Sioux City who all came to the camp. And then as when we were in high school, the Jewish community centers would like have basketball tournaments and baseball tournaments and dances. And we'd be bused, or we'd bus to the different cities, or they'd come to Omaha for all these parties. So I think it was a ploy on one hand of all the Jewish parents from the Midwest to meet other Jewish kids, so then in turn they would meet other Jewish kids. But it did make for wonderful friendships. And it did make for that kind of behavior where maybe people in Chicago or St. Louis didn't have to do that because they had a multitude of people they were always meeting. So there is, when I meet people today who are from Des Moines or Sioux City or something like that, there is, in Kansas City, there is a closeness. And then we all would go to the same colleges. So everybody was at Oklahoma, you were at Illinois, you were at, no one ever went west to school. They all went east for some reason. I don't know what that was, but anyway, or east of Omaha.
Judy,
Yeah.
do you have a lot of relatives on your mother's side?
No, we're the only ones left. My uncle, my mom's brother, had 2 children. One, I don't know where, one's in Detroit. And the other one, I don't know. And my aunt had none. And my brothers passed away. So it's just me, and nobody had any other children. My dad's family had I've got a lot of cousins on my dad's side. But none on my mother's.
What were your years at Central High like?
Fabulous. They were so much fun. I didn't study a lot, but I was always like on the border of trouble. Or sometimes not even just the border. I got in trouble all the time. I was always in the principal's office, but I had a wonderful time and great friends. And something interesting, as an end result of what my father had said, it was a time when there was a lot of integration going on at Central. And so this young black man called me to go out, and I didn't know what to say. And so I said to him, well, I got to tell you, my dad won't let me date non-Jewish boys. So that was a way of, I thought that was kind of, but Omaha Central was very integrated, and it was fabulous to grow up that way. We had a lot of black friends, it was just a lot of non-Jewish kids. It was terrific. At that time, your parents did not want you dating non-Jewish boys, of which some of us snuck out and did. We always went over to the Jewish Community Center. There were the clubs. I found out later, Omaha was one of the very few places to have these clubs, high school clubs. People were not voted in or out. You talk to kids from Chicago or St. Louis or New York or all these places, and they were in what would be sororities where people could be blackballed. And Omaha was unique in that, again, Omaha being Omaha, did not want people excluded or hurt. And so, you don't need that along with high school and everything else. So they had BBYO or BBG or whatever it was, the Jewish Youth Council, had all those boys group, the BBG boys, and then they had several girls groups. And they were always breaking off and forming new ones, and then everybody be mad at everybody because they left, formed a new one. But I was part of Rahanu, which was formed a year ahead of us by the girls a year ahead of us who wanted to break off from what they were in. And we had dances, and you did projects, and they were your friends, and it was a very social thing. And then the boys groups all had, they had dances, and they had dances at the Shimmer hotels, and Fontenelle Hotel, and then they had parties that weren't formal at all, that were in people's houses. And there was a street called Sunset Trail. A lot of people, tons of people lived right before Fair Acres in Old Dundee and right there. And the Sunset Trail was a street that went all the way through, and it was like every house was lived in by Jewish people. And so people would drive up and down in the summer, Sunset Trail, and there would just be always kids hanging around outside. And Nancy Hornstein's house, and she lived next to the Noddles. And they lived, just Susie Wolfson lived around there, and all these people, and we just, in the summer, that's just where you hung out. Just driving up and down, and then you'd drive to Tyner's, which was a drive-in, and then you'd go back. And we didn't do a lot of movies. I don't think, looking back and seeing some of the movies, you can see why some of them were terrible. So we did drive-in stuff, but I think it was just for the food. We didn't do the movies. But when you did go to movies on a date, you would go to the Orpheum or somewhere, and we dressed up. We wore high heels, and we wore skirts that had hoops in them. And the men wore ties actually, to go to a movie. And then you would go, everyone went to the Blackstone Hotel. And you would go to the Blackstone Hotel after a movie, and they had the best cheesecake, the best food in the world. And we'd go there. And when you got to be 21, you could go into the Cottonwood room. Okay, and that's where they had this beautiful mural. And you were not grown up, and you could have a drink. Okay. But before that, you stayed in the outer room, which was the coffee shop. And you'd go there, and they invented the Reuben, and they invented the crumb coffee cake, and it was a fabulous hotel. And upstairs in this hotel was the Orleans room, which was a gorgeous, what would be, I think today still, a four-star room, four-star dining establishment. And there was a Mr. Monrose there who would make the Caesar salads at the table, and he'd make steak Diane, and it was really, really elegant. And you went on your anniversary or your birthday. And the other great place, as I'd mentioned before, was the Colony Club, which was downtown, and they would have, Omaha had great entertainment, like that came, comedians. Buddy, what was his name? In the 60s and 70s, they were all nightclub people. And so these were separate clubs where you'd have dinner in one room, and then you'd go into the next for the entertainment. And Angelo's was a huge one, which was on 72nd Street. And they had entertainment too. I mean, Joan Rivers. I mean, people like that came. Buddy Hackett, maybe he came. But it was terrific, and they were on routes, comedic routes that they'd go to these different cities. And Omaha was right up there with Chicago. I mean, we had great evening, top-line entertainment that came there. And the Orpheum Theater had stage shows. When we were real young, you went for a quarter to the stage show. And they had acts on Saturday afternoon. That was when I was in grade school. There were a lot of theaters downtown. The State Theater, the Paramount Theater, which was beautiful. They were all beautiful. The Orpheum and the Paramount were two of the most beautiful theaters. The Paramount now is the Rose. where, and I don't think they changed too much of it. But it's now the Rose, and there was a great theater in Dundee called the Admiral Theater, which had like more off first run entertainment. It was nice too.
Where did you go to college?
University of Illinois.
And where did you meet Shelley?
University of Illinois.
Tell me about meeting him and telling me about getting married.
Well, we met, we were fixed up, and I said, no, I don't want to go on a blind date with anybody. So tell him that my grandmother's very sick. So my roommates had somebody coming in town, and I went out with him, and little did I know he went to stay at the, Shelley was a senior at the time, and was living with some other guys from other fraternities. They'd all left their fraternity house and rented one house. And so he was staying with them. I didn't know, and I went, and there's this Shelley Brodsky who was being said, who is that guy? He's so mean. I mean, not mean, he's avoiding me. So, well, his name is Shelley Brodsky. I said, oh my God, I told him my grandmother was sick. So I went and I said, oh, I'm really sorry. I said, but I'd sure like to go out with you now. And he said, well, I'm not so sure. He says, because I think you're kind of rude. He said, because you, so I had to beg him, okay, to take me out. And so we went, and it was that way from then on, that's the way. And then we got married in Omaha, and at Temple, and then our reception was at Highland, when Highland was Highland, and then we were in Omaha, and then we moved to Kansas City for 10 years, and then back to Omaha. And now I hope I haven't forgotten anything. I've had a wonderful, wonderful life. Shelley, I love you very much. You've made my whole life so wonderful. And we share so much. And it wouldn't have been the life without you. And my darling children and grandchildren, I'm so proud of you. Joel, we miss you. We love you. Karen, we love you and are so proud of the woman you become. I have the highest of hopes for you, and you achieved them, and I'm just so very proud of you. Peter, we love you so much. You have become such a wonderful man. You're such a wonderful father. You're a great son. Karen, you're the best daughter in the whole world and my best friend. And Madigan and Rachel, I want to tell you that you have a lot that you've inherited a lot. And I know that you will live up to and go beyond everything that we have done and have loved, and that you will have wonderful families. I hope I live to see your families and that your children, and that you'll make wonderful, wonderful adults and grandparents yourselves, and that you'll have this to remember your grandparents, and Divot, who's in the background, barking away. But I wish for you all half as wonderful a life as I've had with all of you, and how much I love you all. How was it?